The text came precisely at 4:15 p.m. on the day of our 10th anniversary. I stared at my phone, the screen's glow illuminating my face in the dimmed lighting of my office at Meridian Healthcare, where I'd just wrapped up a marketing presentation. "Something's come up at work. Can't make dinner tonight. Don't wait up. Sorry." No terms of endearment, no promise to make it up to me, not even a proper acknowledgment of what day it was. Just 12 words that confirmed what I'd been suspecting for months. My marriage was no longer a priority to my husband. What Andrew didn't know was that I had already made reservations at the Overlook Hotel's restaurant for a surprise anniversary dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Overlook was where Finley Investments executives took their most important clients. The Overlook was also where, 1 hour later, I watched through the plate glass windows as Andrew pulled out a chair for his executive assistant, Olivia Carter, her hand lingering on his shoulder as she sat down. I remained in my car across the street, a perfect vantage point to observe them through the restaurant's expansive windows. They weren't even trying to be discreet, his hand reaching across the table to touch hers, her tilting her head back in laughter at something he said, the champagne toast, and finally, the unmistakable exchange of a small jewelry box that she opened with theatrical delight. The diamond earrings I'd found on our credit card statement last week. The client gift he'd explained away so smoothly. For nearly 2 hours, I sat perfectly still, watching my marriage dissolve before my eyes while documenting everything with the camera my instincts had told me to bring. Each photo I took wasn't fueled by jealousy or heartbreak, but by a cold, calculating need for evidence. The numbness spreading through me wasn't from shock. It was the crystallization of a decision I'd been unconsciously preparing for longer than I cared to admit. I met Andrew Mitchell 12 years ago at a charity gala for the hospital where I was launching a rebranding campaign. He was charming, ambitious, and attentive in a way that made everyone else in the room disappear. As the rising star at Finley Investments, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was headed. I was drawn to his drive. It matched my own. We were married within 18 months, merging our ambitions and assets into what I believed was an equal partnership. The first 7 years were good, great even, by most standards. We renovated our Craftsman home in Lakeside Springs Historic District, hosted the right parties, joined the right clubs, and built our careers with single-minded focus. When Andrew's grandfather Robert passed away 3 years ago, leaving him the family's waterfront cabin and 15 acres on Lake Meridian, I was the one who handled the paperwork, organized the inheritance documentation, and researched the property's potential. My background in property development before transitioning to marketing proved invaluable as we navigated the complex inheritance process. What Andrew never realized was that I noticed the subtle shifts in our marriage coinciding with his promotion to VP of Operations, the later nights at the office, the weekend conferences that required his presence but somehow never appeared in the company newsletter, the gradual emotional distance that grew between us like a slow-forming crystal. The changes were almost imperceptible at first, but I've always been detail-oriented. It's what made me successful in my career, and it's what alerted me to the fracturing of my marriage long before that anniversary text message. 2 months before our anniversary, I hired a private investigator, not out of jealousy or suspicion, but out of a practical need to confirm what I already knew. The decision was made with the same analytical approach I would apply to a market research project: gather data, analyze patterns, determine next steps. The investigator's reports arrived weekly in encrypted emails, each one building a comprehensive picture of Andrew's betrayal. Dinner meetings that extended to nightcaps at the Overlook Hotel, lunch hours that stretched well beyond 60 minutes, and eventually, photographic evidence of Andrew and Olivia entering and exiting his corporate apartment downtown. I didn't confront him. Confrontation would only give him time to prepare, to hide assets, to construct a narrative that positioned him as the victim of a demanding, career-focused wife. Instead, I began making preparations. I opened separate bank accounts, gradually transferring small sums that wouldn't trigger Andrew's attention. I digitized important documents and secured them in encrypted cloud storage. I consulted with my friend Zoe Harper, a corporate attorney whose expertise in divorce proceedings was matched only by her discretion. "You need to be methodical about this," Zoe advised during one of our coffee meetings at Summit Coffee, where we were certain not to run into anyone from Andrew's firm. "Document everything: timeline of his absences, evidence of expenditures on Olivia, any conversations where he's lied about his whereabouts, and most importantly, get your financial house in order before he realizes what's happening." I'd already started. The inheritance property, 15 acres of prime lakefront land that had recently been rezoned for development, was particularly interesting to me. While the deed was in Andrew's name, I had been the one to file the paperwork during the inheritance process. I had also been the one to submit the applications for rezoning, acting as Andrew's representative with his signed authorization. What Andrew had failed to notice, in his distraction with Olivia and his corporate climbing, was that I had positioned myself as an essential administrator of the property's legal status. The day after I discovered them at the Overlook, I didn't cry or scream or confront. Instead, I went to work as usual, presented a new marketing campaign to the board, accepted their praise with professional grace, and then met with Diana Chen, a forensic accountant Zoe had recommended. "Your finances are more separated than most married couples I see," Diana observed as she reviewed the documentation I'd provided. "You've maintained excellent records." "I've always believed in financial independence," I replied, not mentioning that this belief had intensified as I'd watched my mother lose everything in her own divorce 20 years earlier. "What's our next step?" Diana outlined a strategy to further protect my assets while documenting Andrew's financial activities with Olivia. The jewelry, the dinners, the weekend trips categorized as business expenses, all would become evidence of financial misconduct within our marriage. That evening, Andrew came home late as usual. He kissed my cheek absently, asked about my day without listening to the answer, and retreated to his home office with a glass of the expensive scotch he'd recently developed a taste for. "The Hartwell project is demanding everyone's time," he explained vaguely when I asked about his work. "We're in the final stages of due diligence." I nodded sympathetically, not mentioning that I knew the Hartwell project had concluded 2 weeks ago according to Finley Investments' press release, not mentioning that I knew exactly how he'd spent his afternoon, in a lunch meeting that extended until 4:30 p.m., followed by a stop at a jewelry store where he purchased a bracelet that matched the earrings he'd given Olivia on our anniversary. Over the next 4 weeks, I executed my plan with precision. I scheduled consultations with Marcus Reynolds, a divorce attorney known for his strategic approach to high-asset separations. I arranged for a comprehensive property valuation of the inheritance land, confirming what I had suspected. The recent rezoning had tripled its value, making it the most significant asset in our marital portfolio. "The inheritance property is legally Andrew's," Marcus confirmed during our meeting. "Inherited assets typically remain separate property in a divorce. However," he added, reviewing the documentation I'd brought, "the way the property has been managed since inheritance is interesting. You've been the primary administrator, handling the rezoning that significantly increased its value." "I have all the paperwork," I confirmed. "Every application, every authorization form signed by Andrew, every communication with the zoning board." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That creates an argument for your contribution to the asset's appreciation. Not enough to claim ownership, but possibly enough to negotiate a significant settlement." But I had something else in mind. Something that required more specialized legal expertise than even Marcus could provide. Through Zoe's network, I was introduced to Eleanor Blackwell, an attorney specializing in real estate and property development law. "What you're proposing is complex," Eleanor warned after hearing my plan. but not impossible, especially given your documentation and Andrew's distractions. The plan was this. I wasn't going to fight for the inheritance property in the divorce. I was going to acquire it legitimately through a carefully structured business transaction before Andrew even realized divorce was on the horizon. The opportunity presented itself more quickly than I anticipated. 3 days after my meeting with Eleanor, Andrew mentioned needing liquid assets for a new investment opportunity. It's time-sensitive, he explained, the most animated he'd been, during a conversation with me in months. The returns could be substantial, but I need to free up cash. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What about the lake property? I suggested casually. You've always said it's more of a burden than a blessing since your grandfather passed. Andrew hesitated. I've thought about selling, but the market isn't ideal right now. Actually, I countered, pulling up the property valuation on my tablet. The rezoning has significantly impacted comparable properties in the area. Look at these recent sales figures. I watched as Andrew's eyes widened at the numbers. I had no idea, he murmured. The rezoning application we submitted last year, I reminded him. It was approved 3 months ago. The "we" was deliberate, a subtle reminder of my involvement in managing his inheritance, something he'd been too preoccupied to handle himself. Even so, finding a buyer who can move quickly and offer fair value won't be easy, he said. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. What if I told you I might know an interested buyer? 2 days later, Andrew signed a purchase agreement for the inheritance property. The buyer was Lakeside Vision LLC, a development company specializing in luxury waterfront properties. What Andrew failed to research, what his distraction with Olivia and his new investment opportunity prevented him from discovering, was that Lakeside Vision LLC had been incorporated just 1 week earlier. Its primary stakeholder, through a series of perfectly legal corporate structures, was me. The transaction was handled by Eleanor's firm, with all proper disclosures and documentation. The purchase price was fair market value. I insisted on this to ensure the transaction would withstand legal scrutiny. The money came from my separate savings and a business loan secured against my impressive investment portfolio. The one Andrew had never bothered to ask about, assuming my financial acumen was limited to our household budget. The day the property transaction closed, I received confirmation from my private investigator that Andrew and Olivia had booked a weekend getaway at a resort 2 hours north of Lakeside Springs. Apparently, they were celebrating something, perhaps his new investment, perhaps their relationship reaching some milestone. The reason didn't matter. What mattered was the timing, perfect for the next phase of my plan. While Andrew and Olivia enjoyed their romantic weekend, I was meeting with a contractor to begin preliminary work on the lakefront property. Nothing major, just enough activity to establish Lakeside Vision's immediate ownership presence. I also arranged for new locks on the cabin and updated the security system with my credentials as the property owner. Sunday evening, I was sitting at our dining room table reviewing marketing projections for Meridian Healthcare's newest service line when Andrew returned home. He seemed relaxed, rejuvenated in a way he never was after his supposed business trips. The Northridge investment is proceeding better than expected, he announced, pouring himself a scotch. The capital from the lake property has been put to good use. I smiled. I'm glad to hear it. How's the property transition going? Andrew waved dismissively. Smooth enough. The buyer seems eager to develop. Grandfather would probably roll in his grave knowing his fishing cabin is going to become luxury condos. But times change. They certainly do, I agreed, returning to my work. The following weekend, Andrew announced he needed to visit the lake property to retrieve some family mementos before the new owners began development. Of course, I said. Would you like me to come with you? He declined, as I knew he would. What I didn't tell him was that I'd received a text from my private investigator confirming Olivia had cleared her Saturday schedule as well. While they drove to the lake, I monitored their progress through the tracking app I'd installed on Andrew's phone months earlier. They arrived at 11:47 a.m., and I received an alert from the security system when someone attempted to use the old key on the cabin's new locks. At 11:52 a.m., Andrew called me. "The keys don't work," he said, confusion and irritation battling in his voice. "And there's construction equipment on the property." "That's strange," I replied calmly. "The new owners must have moved quickly." "Did you try calling them?" "I don't have their contact information," Andrew admitted. "The sale was handled through their attorneys." "I might have the information at home," I offered. "I'll look for it when you return." What I didn't tell him was that while he and Olivia stood frustrated outside the cabin that once belonged to his grandfather, I was sitting in my home office reviewing the security camera footage in real time, watching as Olivia placed a comforting hand on Andrew's arm as he made several more attempts with the key, as they eventually retreated to their car when a construction supervisor approached to inform them they were trespassing on private property. That evening, Andrew returned home in a dark mood. "Something's not right with the lake property sale," he declared, pacing our living room. "I think we need to review the documentation." "Of course," I agreed, retrieving the file I had prepared for precisely this moment. "Here's everything from the transaction." I watched as Andrew reviewed the papers, his frown deepening as he examined each document. "This buyer, Lakeside Vision LLC, I should have researched them more thoroughly before selling. The sale is complete, though," I noted. "These signatures are legally binding." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing but now recognized as a tell for his mounting frustration. "Yes, but there might be recourse if there was any misrepresentation." "Everything seems properly disclosed," I observed, pointing to specific clauses in the agreement. "The purchase price reflected fair market value, all contingencies were addressed, and you signed the final authorization for the sale." Andrew's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then quickly turned the phone face down on the table. Olivia, no doubt, wondering about their thwarted plans at the cabin. "I need to consult with our attorney," Andrew decided, gathering the papers. "Actually," I corrected gently, "you should consult with your attorney. I wasn't party to the sale of your inherited property, remember? It remained your separate asset, as you've mentioned several times over the years." Something in my tone must have alerted him that this conversation was different. He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. "What's going on, Rebecca?" he asked cautiously. I maintained eye contact, my voice steady. "I think we both know things haven't been right for some time, Andrew. Your work demands, your late nights, your weekend trips that never quite align with the company calendar." His expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness. "If you're implying something—" "I'm not implying anything," I interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm stating facts. Facts that include your relationship with Olivia Carter, your executive assistant. Facts that include dinners at the Overlook, jewelry purchases, and weekend getaways that don't appear in any corporate itinerary." Andrew's face paled, then flushed with anger. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "Just as you've been protecting your relationship with Olivia while maintaining the facade of our marriage." The argument that followed was surprisingly brief. Andrew cycled through predictable stages: denial, then anger, then bargaining, and finally a cold assessment of his position. He was, after all, a financial strategist accustomed to evaluating situations based on risk and leverage. By the time he retreated to the guest bedroom, he understood two critical facts. I had irrefutable evidence of his affair, and the lake property transaction was legally binding. What he didn't yet know, what he would discover the following morning, When he arrived at his office, was that I had sent a comprehensive documentation package to Finley Investments' board of directors, detailing how company resources had been misused to facilitate his relationship with Olivia. The package included expense reports showing client dinners that were actually dates, hotel charges for non-existent business trips, and company car usage for personal rendezvous. I had been careful to focus solely on the misuse of company resources, avoiding any mention of the personal aspects of their relationship. This wasn't about exposing an affair. It was about highlighting a pattern of financial misconduct that would concern the board far more than Andrew's marital infidelity. By noon, the next day, Andrew had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. By 3 o'clock, he returned home to find divorce papers waiting on the dining room table, alongside a USB drive containing copies of all the evidence I had compiled over the previous months. "You've destroyed my career," he accused, throwing the divorce papers down. "No, Andrew," I replied calmly. "You jeopardized your career when you decided company resources could fund your affair. I simply brought those decisions to light." "And the lake property?" he demanded. "Was that part of your revenge plan too?" "The lake property was a business transaction," I explained. "Lakeside Vision LLC purchased it at fair market value, providing you with the capital you needed for your investment opportunity." Andrew's eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "Who exactly owns Lakeside Vision?" I allowed myself a small smile. "The ownership structure is quite complex. Multiple investors, corporate entities. But if you're asking who the primary stakeholder is, that would be me." The shock on Andrew's face was worth every careful step I had taken over the previous months. Every document filed, every conversation recorded, every financial move calculated. "That's not possible," he stammered. "The inheritance wasn't marital property. You had no claim to it." "I never claimed it as marital property," I clarified. "I purchased it through a legitimate business transaction that you initiated when you decided you needed capital for your new investment, which, by the way, appears to be underperforming rather dramatically, according to my sources at Finley." Andrew collapsed into a chair, the full magnitude of his situation finally registering. His career was in jeopardy, his affair exposed, his most valuable asset now legally in my possession, and his investment of the proceeds, which I later learned was in a venture capital fund Olivia's brother had started, was showing concerning signs of instability. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "A clean, efficient divorce," I replied. "The terms are outlined in the papers. I think you'll find them reasonable given the circumstances." The terms were indeed reasonable, almost generous considering the evidence I had compiled. I wasn't interested in a prolonged legal battle or public humiliation. I wanted resolution and the freedom to move forward without the weight of a fractured marriage. Over the next weeks, Andrew's position continued to deteriorate. Finley Investments' internal investigation expanded to include a forensic audit of his department. Olivia resigned abruptly, reportedly accepting a position with a firm on the opposite coast. The venture capital fund where Andrew had invested the property sale proceeds announced a strategic restructuring that financial analysts recognized as a precursor to significant losses. Meanwhile, I continued my work at Meridian Healthcare, accepting a promotion to Executive Director of Strategic Marketing that I'd been quietly working toward for the past year. Lakeside Vision LLC began developing the waterfront property into a boutique wellness retreat rather than the luxury condos Andrew had assumed, a project that aligned perfectly with Meridian's expansion plans and would eventually become a partnership between my two professional worlds. 6 months after I watched Andrew and Olivia celebrate with champagne and stolen jewelry at the Overlook Hotel, our divorce was finalized with minimal drama. Andrew accepted the settlement terms, likely recognizing that any attempt to contest them would only further damage his already precarious professional standing. On the day the final papers were signed, I drove out to the lake property, my property now, and stood on the shore where Robert Mitchell had taught his grandson to fish decades earlier. The cabin had been respectfully incorporated into the retreat's design, preserving its character while transforming its purpose. I felt no victory, no vindictive satisfaction in how events had unfolded. Instead, I experienced something quieter and more profound. The certainty that I had protected myself through foresight and strategy rather than becoming a victim of betrayal. 1 year later, the Lakeside Wellness Retreat opened to considerable acclaim, featuring in several national publications highlighting innovative healthcare destinations. Andrew had relocated to a smaller city 3 states away, attempting to rebuild his career with a regional investment firm. Olivia, according to social media updates that occasionally appeared in my feed, had established herself on the West Coast, her profile carefully scrubbed of any reference to Finley Investments or the man she'd celebrated with on my anniversary. As for me, I continued forward, neither defined by the betrayal I had experienced nor by the calculated response I had executed. The anniversary dinner Andrew had canceled became a distant memory, replaced by new milestones and achievements that belonged solely to me. The inheritance he had nearly squandered was transformed into something meaningful and sustainable. And the woman who had once sat in a car documenting her husband's infidelity now stood confidently at the helm of 2 successful ventures, her future secured by her own hand. The text message that had started it all. Something's come up at work. Can't make dinner tonight. Don't wait up. Sorry. Had been everything except what it claimed. Nothing to do with work, impossible to dismiss with "don't wait up," and entirely unworthy of being addressed with a simple "sorry." But in the end, it had been the catalyst for a transformation that no anniversary dinner could have provided. The reclamation of my independence, my financial security, and my vision for the future. The morning after discovering Andrew and Olivia, at the Overlook, I arrived at my office at Meridian Healthcare 30 minutes earlier than usual. I needed the solitude to compartmentalize what I'd witnessed, to separate the personal betrayal from the strategic response it demanded. My corner office, with its view of Lakeside Springs' downtown skyline, had always been my sanctuary. Today, it would become my war room. I opened my laptop and created a new encrypted folder labeled Project Independence before methodically documenting everything I'd observed the previous evening. Times, locations, interactions, all recorded with the clinical precision I brought. To my marketing analytics, I attached the photos I'd taken, each one time-stamped and geotagged. This wasn't emotional. This was evidence gathering. By the time my assistant Jessica knocked on my door with my morning coffee, I had outlined a preliminary strategy with timeline markers and decision points. This would be the most important campaign I'd ever developed, with myself as both client and strategist. The executive team is gathering for the quarterly review at 9, Jessica reminded me, placing the coffee on my desk. Thank you, I replied, smoothly minimizing my personal project and opening the presentation I'd prepared for today's meeting. I'm ready. And I was. For 3 hours, I led the executive team through Meridian Healthcare's market positioning, competitive analysis, and growth projections. I fielded questions with focused clarity, proposed innovative solutions to emerging challenges, and secured unanimous approval for my department's budget increase. No one in that boardroom would have guessed that less than 12 hours earlier, I had watched my husband celebrate my anniversary with another woman. Exceptional work as always, Rebecca, Dr. Eleanor Winters, Meridian's CEO, commented as we exited the conference room. The board is particularly impressed with your foresight on the wellness retreat concept. Healthcare is moving beyond traditional hospital settings, and you're positioning us ahead of that curve. I smiled with appropriate professional modesty. Thank you, Eleanor. I believe preventative care destinations represent significant growth potential. What I didn't mention was how this concept connected to the lakefront property Andrew had inherited. Property that, with the right strategy, could become far more valuable than he realized. The seeds of my plan were already germinating. Back in my office, I made my first strategic call to Zoe Harper. We'd been friends since business school, her legal career rising in parallel with my marketing trajectory. More importantly, Zoe had navigated her own divorce 2 years earlier with such tactical precision that her ex-husband still didn't fully understand how comprehensively he'd lost. "Lunch today," I said when she answered. "Summit coffee at 1. It's important." Zoe didn't ask questions over the phone, another reason I valued her. "I'll clear my schedule," she replied simply. Summit Coffee sat in the arts district of Lakeside Springs, its clientele consisting primarily of gallery owners, museum staff, and creative professionals. No one from Andrew's financial world would be caught there, making it perfect for sensitive conversations. Zoe was already seated in a private corner booth when I arrived. She'd ordered for both of us, salads and sparkling water, our standard. Working lunch. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "So it's confirmed then," she said, keeping her voice low despite our isolated location. I nodded, sliding my phone across the table with the photos from the Overlook displayed. Anniversary dinner without his wife. Zoe examined the evidence, her attorney's mind cataloging details. "The jewelry box is a nice touch. Gift on your anniversary that establishes pattern and intent." She looked up. "How are you handling it?" "Methodically," I replied, taking back my phone. "I need your help constructing a strategic response, not an emotional reaction." Zoe's slight smile conveyed approval. "Tell me what you're thinking." I outlined my preliminary thoughts: financial disentanglement, evidence gathering, timing considerations. Zoe listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her tablet. "Your instinct to avoid confrontation is correct," she confirmed when I finished. "The element of surprise is your greatest advantage. The moment he knows you know, he'll start hiding assets and constructing counter-narratives." "I've already begun securing my finances," I explained. "Separate accounts established 6 months ago when I first suspected something wasn't right. Investment portfolio diversified and partially segregated from our joint holdings." Zoe nodded approvingly. "Good start. Now you need 3 people: a forensic accountant to track his financial movements, a private investigator to document the affair comprehensively, and a divorce attorney specializing in high-asset separations." "I already have the PI," I admitted, "hired 2 months ago." The reports confirmed my suspicions, but lacked the concrete visual evidence I needed. Last night provided that. "Smart," Zoe commented. "For the forensic accountant, you want Diana Chen. She specializes in uncovering financial infidelity alongside the personal kind. As for legal representation..." She paused, considering. "Marcus Reynolds. He's not the most aggressive divorce attorney in town, but he's the most strategic. He thinks 3 moves ahead, which matches your approach." I took notes, already, formulating my next steps. "What about the inheritance property? It's technically separate from marital assets." "Typically, yes," Zoe agreed. "Inherited property usually remains individual rather than marital. However," she tapped her fingers thoughtfully against her water glass, "you mentioned you handled all the paperwork for the inheritance, including the rezoning application that significantly increased its value?" I nodded. Andrew was too busy climbing the corporate ladder to deal with administrative details, as he called them. I managed everything: probate documentation, property transfers, tax filings, and the rezoning process. A slow smile spread across Zoe's face. "That's very interesting. You may have established what we call active appreciation contribution. Your direct involvement increased the asset's value substantially, which could give you a claim to at least a portion of that increased value." "I had a feeling that might be the case," I replied, "but I'm considering a different approach." I leaned forward slightly. What if I could acquire the property outright through legitimate business means before divorce proceedings even begin? Zoe's eyebrows raised, professional interest clearly piqued. Go on. I outlined my nascent plan, creating a business entity, identifying Andrew's financial vulnerabilities, orchestrating a situation where he would willingly sell the property, all conducted through proper legal channels. Ambitious, Zoe commented when I finished. Complex, but potentially brilliant if executed properly. She pulled out her phone. You need to meet with Eleanor Blackwell. She specializes in complex real estate transactions with an emphasis on corporate structures. If anyone can help you construct this properly, it's her. 2 days later, I sat in Eleanor Blackwell's office in the financial district, surrounded by awards for legal excellence in real estate law. Eleanor herself was a study in contained precision, her steel gray bob cut with architectural exactness, her questions direct and penetrating. So you want to legitimately purchase property from your husband, whom you intend to divorce without him realizing your connection to the purchasing entity, Eleanor summarized after I'd explained my situation. All while ensuring the transaction would withstand later legal scrutiny. Precisely, I confirmed. Is it possible? Eleanor removed her glasses, a gesture I recognized as her shifting from initial assessment to strategic consideration. Possible. Yes. Simple? No. It requires a carefully constructed corporate entity with legitimate business purpose beyond simply acquiring this specific property. It needs proper capitalization, clear organizational structure, and appropriate distance between you and the front-facing aspects of the company. I understand. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to establish legitimacy. Eleanor nodded, apparently satisfied with my commitment. Then let's discuss the structure. We'll need multiple layers, a primary LLC that makes the purchase, owned by a holding company, which in turn has a management company overseeing operations. You would be the beneficial owner, but several steps removed from the purchasing entity. For the next hour, we outlined the framework for what would become Lakeside Vision LLC. By the time I left Eleanor's office, I had a clear roadmap for establishing a legitimate business entity that could purchase Andrew's inheritance property while maintaining appropriate legal separation from me personally. The next step was meeting with Diana Chen, the forensic accountant Zoe had recommended. Diana's office was minimalist and modern, her approach refreshingly direct. Financial infidelity almost always accompanies the personal kind, she explained after reviewing the preliminary information I'd provided. Let's see what patterns emerge from your husband's spending. Diana's analysis was comprehensive and revealing. Beyond the obvious expenditures on Olivia, the jewelry, dinners, weekend getaways, there were concerning patterns in Andrew's investment activities. He's been liquidating portions of your joint investment portfolio and redirecting those funds into high-risk ventures, Diana noted, highlighting specific transactions. Nothing illegal, but definitely aggressive moves made without your knowledge or consent. That's consistent with recent behavioral changes, I commented. He's become increasingly fixated on accelerating his wealth accumulation. Mentions of early retirement, achieving financial freedom by 40. Diana nodded knowingly. Classic signs of someone planning a life transition. He's positioning himself financially for a future that likely doesn't include you. The confirmation stung, despite my emotional preparation. What's your assessment of his current financial position? Stretched, Diana replied, showing me a detailed analysis of Andrew's cash flow. He's asset-rich but cash-poor at the moment. The maintenance costs on the lake property are significant, especially since it's currently underutilized. His recent investment choices have tied up considerable liquid capital in ventures that won't show returns for years, if ever. I absorbed this information, immediately seeing how it aligned with my developing strategy. So he would be potentially receptive to an offer for the lake property if it provided immediate capital for other investments? Highly receptive, I'd say, Diana confirmed, especially given the property's emotional complications. It's his grandfather's legacy, but it's becoming a financial burden. That creates psychological tension that makes people susceptible to financial decisions they might otherwise avoid. Armed with this knowledge, I scheduled a meeting with Marcus Reynolds, the divorce attorney Zoe had recommended. His corner office overlooked the courthouse, an intentional positioning that signaled his professional focus. "Your situation is unfortunately common," Marcus observed after I'd briefed him on Andrew's affair and my discovery. "What's less common is your approach. Most clients come to me emotionally distraught, seeking immediate confrontation. I'm interested in optimal outcomes, not emotional satisfaction," I replied. Marcus nodded appreciatively. "That's refreshing. Tell me about this property acquisition strategy you're considering." I outlined my plan, now refined through consultations with Eleanor and informed by Diana's financial analysis. "Creative," he acknowledged, "and potentially very effective if properly executed. However, you should be aware of the risks. If a judge later determines the transaction was conducted specifically to deprive your husband of an asset before divorce proceedings, it could be invalidated." "I understand. That's why I'm establishing Lakeside Vision as a legitimate business entity with a genuine commercial purpose beyond this single transaction. The property fits into a broader business model focused on wellness retreat development, an industry I've researched extensively for Meridian Healthcare." Marcus studied me with increased interest. "You've thought this through more thoroughly than most. Still, timing will be crucial. The transaction should be completed well before any divorce filing to establish proper separation between the events. How long would you recommend?" "Ideally, 3 months minimum between property acquisition and divorce filing," Marcus advised. "And the transaction must be entirely above board. Fair market value, proper documentation, all appropriate disclosures." "Of course," I agreed. "I want this to be legitimate in every respect." As I left Marcus's office, my path forward was clearer than ever. The pieces were aligning: Andrew's financial vulnerability, my business strategy, the legal framework, to make it happen. Now I needed to accelerate the timeline. The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. That weekend, Andrew mentioned needing to attend a financial conference in Chicago. The private investigator I'd retained confirmed what I already suspected: Olivia would be accompanying him, though her name appeared nowhere on the official attendance list. While they were away, I used my authorized access to our home office to review Andrew's recent financial correspondence. His password hadn't changed, still our wedding date followed by his childhood dog's name. The emails confirmed Diana's assessment: Andrew was actively seeking investment opportunities that promised significant returns, particularly in venture capital and tech startups. I also discovered something unexpected: communications with a real estate developer who had expressed interest in the lake property 6 months earlier. Andrew had declined their offer, but the correspondence revealed his ambivalence about the property itself. He valued its connection to his grandfather, but considered it an underperforming asset given its potential. This was the leverage point I needed: the emotional and financial tension that would make my strategy viable. When Andrew returned from Chicago, I casually mentioned reading an article about lakefront property values in our region. "Apparently, the rezoning we secured has created a significant market shift," I commented over breakfast. "Properties with development potential have nearly tripled in value." Andrew looked up from his phone, interest momentarily piqued. "Really? That much?" I nodded, keeping my tone conversational. "The article specifically mentioned the North Shore area where your grandfather's property is located. Some properties are selling within days of listing." "Interesting," he replied, but quickly returned to his phone, presumably texting Olivia, though he claimed it was work correspondence that couldn't wait. I let the subject drop, having planted the seed. 3 days later, Andrew brought it up himself. "That article you mentioned about lakefront properties," he said as we prepared for bed, still maintaining the routines of a functioning marriage despite the growing distance between us. Do you remember where you read it? I'd like to take a look. I think it was in Business Quarterly, I replied, pretending to search my memory. I can find it for you tomorrow if you'd like. That would be helpful, he said. I've been thinking about the lake property lately. It's sitting there underutilized, costing maintenance fees with minimal return. I kept my expression neutral, offering just enough encouragement. It does seem to be more of a financial burden than an asset these days. Exactly, Andrew agreed, seeming relieved that I understood. Grandfather would have wanted it to be enjoyed or put to productive use, not just sitting empty most of the year. The following day, I provided Andrew with not just the article I'd mentioned, carefully selected for its emphasis on rapid value appreciation, but also a property valuation I'd commissioned weeks earlier, presented as though I'd just happened to request it after reading the article. This can't be accurate, Andrew said, staring at the valuation figure. It's more than double what the property was worth when grandfather passed away. The rezoning made all the difference, I explained. Remember all those meetings with the zoning board last year? The property is now approved for commercial development, not just residential use. That changes everything from a valuation perspective. I watched as Andrew processed this information, financial calculations practically visible behind his eyes. If these figures are correct, selling now would provide significant capital for other investments. It's certainly worth considering. I agreed, especially in this market where good investment opportunities require substantial liquid assets. Over the next 2 weeks, I carefully nurtured Andrew's growing interest in selling the property. I mentioned acquaintances who regretted missing market peaks, shared targeted articles about the volatility of lakefront property values, and occasionally asked innocent questions about his new investment interests that subtly emphasized the need for capital. Meanwhile, Eleanor Blackwell completed the formation of Lakeside Vision LLC, with its carefully constructed ownership layers that connected to me only through meticulously documented legal channels. The company established a legitimate business presence, complete with appropriate licensing, industry memberships, and preliminary development portfolios for wellness retreat concepts. Diana Chen continued monitoring Andrew's financial activities, confirming his increasing focus on a particular venture capital opportunity, a tech startup fund managed by a college friend of his that promised exceptional returns but required a minimum investment of $2 million. This aligned perfectly with the lake property's current valuation. The private investigator provided ongoing documentation of Andrew's relationship with Olivia, now including evidence of weekend trips and overnight stays that directly contradicted his business travel claims. Each piece of evidence was carefully archived for potential future use, but my immediate focus remained on the property acquisition strategy. 38 days after discovering Andrew and Olivia at the Overlook Hotel, I implemented the next phase of my plan. During dinner, a rare evening when Andrew was actually home, I mentioned a conversation with a colleague whose brother worked in property development. He mentioned his company is actively looking for lakefront parcels with commercial zoning, I said casually. Apparently, they specialize in boutique hospitality concepts, small luxury resorts, wellness retreats, that sort of thing. Andrew looked up from his meal, interest unmistakable. Did you mention the lake property? I shook my head. Of course not. I know you've been ambivalent about selling. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence given our recent conversations. What's the company called? Andrew asked, trying to sound merely curious. Lakeside Vision, I believe, I replied. They're relatively new, but apparently well capitalized. They've completed several successful projects in neighboring states. 2 days later, Andrew initiated the conversation I'd been strategically building toward. I've been thinking about the lake property, he began as we prepared for separate workdays. With the current market conditions and the rezoning value we've established, it might be the optimal time to sell. I looked up from my coffee, maintaining, just the right balance of surprise and interest. That's a significant decision. Are you sure? I know how much that property meant to your grandfather. The best way to honor his legacy is to use the asset wisely, Andrew replied, revealing the justification he'd constructed for himself. The capital from the sale could be directed toward investments with much greater growth potential. Like that tech fund you mentioned, I suggested. He nodded, enthusiasm breaking through his typical reserve. Exactly. Eric's venture fund has consistently outperformed market averages by substantial margins. The current round is limited to select investors, and the minimum threshold is significant. But the lake property sale would provide exactly the capital needed. If you're serious about selling, I could mention it to my colleague whose brother works at that development company, I offered. What was it called again? Lakeside Vision? Would you? Andrew asked, already reaching for his phone, presumably to text Eric about his impending investment. That would be helpful. If they're specifically looking for properties like ours, like mine, it could streamline the process considerably. I nodded, careful not to appear too eager. I'll reach out today. No promises, of course, but it might be worth exploring. That afternoon, I contacted Eleanor Blackwell to activate the acquisition protocol we'd established. Within 48 hours, Lakeside Vision LLC's representative, a commercial real estate broker with no connection to me, contacted Andrew expressing interest in the property. The negotiation process that followed was conducted entirely at arm's length. I maintained appropriate distance, showing mild supportive interest when Andrew discussed developments but never directly involving myself in the discussions. The offer from Lakeside Vision came in precisely at market value, neither suspiciously high nor opportunistically low, with terms that accommodated Andrew's desire for a quick closing. It's almost too perfect, Andrew commented one evening, reviewing the purchase agreement. They're offering fair value with minimal contingencies and an expedited closing timeline. That's fortunate, I observed neutrally, especially with the time sensitivity of Eric's investment opportunity. Andrew nodded, already mentally allocating the proceeds. I should have the funds in time to secure my position in the venture fund. Eric says the early investors will receive preferential terms. I watched as he signed the purchase agreement, his eagerness to capitalize on his new investment opportunity overriding any lingering sentimental attachment to his grandfather's property, the document that would transfer ownership of Robert Mitchell's legacy to a company that, through careful legal structuring, ultimately belonged to me. 3 weeks later, the transaction closed. Andrew received the proceeds, transferred directly, to his personal account rather than our joint holdings. A choice he made without consulting me, but which served my purposes perfectly. The property legally transferred to Lakeside Vision LLC with all appropriate documentation and disclosures. Andrew celebrated by taking a business trip to New York, a transparent excuse for a weekend with Olivia that my private investigator documented thoroughly. I celebrated more quietly by meeting with Marcus Reynolds to begin preparing the divorce filing that would now move forward on my timeline. The property transaction is complete and properly documented, Marcus confirmed, after reviewing the paperwork. The 3-month waiting period before filing begins now. In the meantime, we'll continue building our case regarding the infidelity and financial misconduct. I nodded, a weight lifting from my shoulders as one crucial phase of my strategy concluded successfully. What's our next focus? Documenting the misuse of company resources to facilitate the affair, Marcus advised. If we can establish that Andrew used Finley Investments funds, expense accounts, or other resources inappropriately, it strengthens our position and potentially creates additional leverage. This aligned with information my private investigator had already begun gathering. Expense reports showing client dinners that were actually dates with Olivia, hotel charges for non-existent business conferences, company car usage for weekend getaways. I'll ensure we have comprehensive documentation, I promised. As I left Marcus's office that afternoon, I drove past the lake property, my property now, though Andrew wouldn't discover that connection for some time. The late afternoon sun glinted off the water, illuminating the weathered cabin Robert Mitchell had built decades earlier. In that moment, I allowed myself to feel the first glimmer of satisfaction since discovering Andrew's betrayal. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming power. In a situation where I had initially been rendered powerless, it was about applying my professional strategic thinking to my personal circumstances. Most importantly, it was about ensuring that Andrew's choices, his decision to betray our marriage, to lie, to redirect our shared resources toward a future that excluded me, would have consequences that extended beyond emotional pain to tangible reality. The property represented more than its monetary value. It symbolized the future Andrew had been planning without me, a future funded by assets I'd helped cultivate, facilitated by a career I'd supported, enabled by a home life I'd maintained while he focused on advancement. Now, a significant piece of that future was mine, acquired through entirely legitimate means that he couldn't contest without revealing his own negligence and misplaced trust. I returned home and spent the evening reviewing Meridian Healthcare's wellness initiative proposal, the legitimate business purpose that would guide Lakeside Vision's development of the property. The lakefront retreat would eventually serve as a showcase for preventative care approaches, mind-body wellness integration, and innovative health tourism concepts. This wasn't merely a cover story, it was a genuine business opportunity that aligned with my professional expertise and Meridian's strategic direction. Andrew returned from his business trip 2 days later, buoyant with the successful transfer of funds to Eric's venture capital fund, and blissfully unaware that his grandfather's property now belonged, through carefully constructed legal channels, to his wife. The wife whose anniversary dinner he had canceled, whose trust he had betrayed, and whose strategic capabilities he had dangerously underestimated. The next phase of my plan could now begin, the methodical documentation of Andrew's professional misconduct that would eventually be delivered to Finley Investments' board of directors, not out of spite or vindictiveness, but as a carefully calculated step in ensuring that when our divorce became public, Andrew would be too preoccupied with professional survival to mount an effective challenge to my financial strategy. As I prepared for bed that night, Andrew absorbed in his phone on the other side of our increasingly cold marital bed, I reflected on how thoroughly my perspective had transformed in the weeks since that devastating text message. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had been channeled into purposeful action. The betrayal remained, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had catalyzed a strategic response that would ultimately leave me stronger, more independent, and firmly in control of my future. Andrew glanced up briefly from his phone. "Everything okay? You seem deep in thought." I offered a slight smile, revealing nothing of my inner calculations. "Just thinking about next steps," I replied truthfully. "For the Meridian marketing campaign?" he asked, already looking back at his screen. "Among other things," I said softly, turning out my bedside lamp. "Among other things." With the lake property now legally transferred to Lakeside Vision LLC, I shifted my focus to the next phase of my strategy, building an irrefutable case regarding Andrew's professional misconduct. This wasn't about simple revenge. It was about creating circumstances where he would be too preoccupied with career survival to effectively contest our divorce proceedings or investigate the true ownership of his grandfather's property. I arranged a confidential meeting with my private investigator, Keith Brennan, at a small cafe 3 towns over from Lakeside Springs. Keith was ex-military intelligence turned private sector, with a methodical approach that matched my own strategic thinking. Over the past 3 months, he had compiled an extensive dossier on Andrew's activities with Olivia, but now I needed him to narrow his focus. "I want to specifically document any instances where company resources were misused to facilitate the affair," I explained, sliding a folder across the table that contained Andrew's corporate expense policy, travel reimbursement guidelines, and client entertainment protocols. Finley Investments has strict ethics policies about personal use of company assets. Keith nodded, reviewing the documents with practiced efficiency. This gives me clear parameters. I already have some relevant material. Hotel charges coded as client meetings, dinners expensed under business development that were actually dates, company car logs that don't match his claimed destinations. I need everything categorized by violation type, with supporting documentation that would stand up to scrutiny from the company's internal audit team, I specified. And I need it within 3 weeks. Keith raised an eyebrow. Accelerated timeline? The venture capital fund Andrew invested in is showing concerning patterns, I explained. My financial contact indicates they're taking excessive risks with investor capital. If it collapses prematurely, it could trigger Andrew to liquidate other assets or become more defensive. In truth, I had no specific information about Eric's venture fund beyond what Andrew had shared, but instinct told me to accelerate my plans. Andrew had been increasingly distracted lately, checking his phone anxiously, making private calls from our back patio, behavior that suggested mounting pressure beyond just maintaining his affair. 3 weeks is doable, Keith confirmed. I'll prioritize the financial documentation and professional misconduct angles. As Keith departed, I opened my laptop to review the preliminary designs for the lakeside wellness retreat that would eventually occupy the property I'd acquired. The architects had preserved the character of Robert's cabin while integrating it into a modern facility focused on preventative healthcare and stress recovery. There was a certain poetic justice in transforming a property Andrew had neglected into something healing and restorative. My phone chimed with a text from Zoe. "Coffee tomorrow. Have updates on A's financial movements." I confirmed our usual location and time, then returned to my planning. The timeline was tightening. I needed to complete documentation of Andrew's professional misconduct, finalize my divorce strategy with Marcus, and continue developing Lakeside Vision's business model, all while maintaining my exemplary performance at Meridian Healthcare. Each element required precise management, with no margin for error or emotional indulgence. The following morning, I received an unexpected opportunity when Andrew mentioned an upcoming executive retreat for Finley Investments' leadership team. "It's last minute, but apparently mandatory," he explained over breakfast, sounding annoyed. "Some corporate bonding nonsense at a mountain resort. I'll be gone Thursday through Sunday." "That's short notice," I observed neutrally. "Will Olivia be coordinating the logistics?" Andrew's hesitation was barely perceptible, but I'd become attuned to these micro-expressions of guilt. "Probably. It's usually handled by the executive assistants." I nodded as if this made perfect sense, while mentally calculating how to utilize this 4-day window. "I hope it's productive," I offered, gathering my things for work. "I have late meetings Thursday and Friday anyway." As soon as Andrew left for his office, I texted Keith. "Subject traveling Thursday. Opportunity to access home office documents if needed." His response was immediate. "Confirmed. Will coordinate specialized team for document retrieval and digital forensics." Next, I contacted Eleanor Blackwell to accelerate Lakeside Vision's development timeline. "I'd like to begin preliminary site work on the lake property next week," I explained during our call. "Nothing major, just environmental assessment and initial surveying." "That's earlier than we discussed," Eleanor noted. "Is there a strategic reason for the acceleration?" "Market conditions are favorable for securing the specialized contractors we need," I explained. "And I'd like to establish our presence on the property decisively." What I didn't say was that I wanted physical evidence of Lakeside Vision's ownership visible when Andrew eventually returned to the property, a calculated move that would force him to confront the permanence of the transaction. Eleanor didn't press for my underlying motivation. "I'll update the timeline and notify the contractors. We'll need to file the appropriate notices with the county, which will create public records of the development plans. That's fine, I confirmed. Everything should proceed through proper channels. My coffee meeting with Zoe later that day provided additional insights into Andrew's financial situation. Diana's analysis shows significant cash transfers from Andrew's personal account to various LLCs associated with Eric's venture fund, Zoe explained, showing me the transaction records Diana had compiled. He's all in on this investment, Rebecca. Nearly everything from the property sale, plus he's liquidated some of his personal stock portfolio. I absorbed this information, seeing both risk and opportunity. How unusual is this level of investment concentration? For someone with Andrew's financial background, highly irregular, Zoe confirmed. It suggests either irrational exuberance or desperate gambling. Either way, it strengthens our position. If the fund performs poorly, he'll be financially vulnerable during divorce proceedings. And if it succeeds, still works in our favor, Zoe assured me. He's created a clear paper trail showing he directed proceeds from his inherited property into personal investments without any consideration of marital asset distribution. It demonstrates financial self-dealing that a divorce court would view unfavorably. I nodded, understanding the win-win scenario we'd established. What about the timeline for filing? Marcus suggested waiting 3 months after the property transaction. That was the conservative recommendation, Zoe agreed. But given Andrew's aggressive investment moves and your solid documentation of the affair, we could move forward. Sooner if necessary. Let's maintain the original schedule unless circumstances demand acceleration, I decided. I want everything meticulously prepared. When Thursday arrived, Andrew departed for his executive retreat with a hastily packed bag and distracted goodbye. I watched from our front window as he loaded his car, noting how he checked his phone repeatedly, not the behavior of someone focused on corporate strategy sessions. Once he was gone, I contacted Keith to confirm the document retrieval operation. His team arrived that evening, 2 professionals in business attire who looked like they could have been colleagues coming for a dinner meeting. They spent 3 hours in our home office, photographing physical documents, copying hard drives, and accessing Andrew's private email accounts. His password security is surprisingly poor for a finance executive, the digital specialist commented, as they prepared to leave. Anniversary dates, pet names, the usual amateur choices. I wasn't surprised. Andrew had always been simultaneously overconfident and careless about personal security, believing his financial expertise somehow translated to all domains. It was this same overconfidence that had led him to sell his grandfather's property, without proper due diligence on the buyer. The retrieved documents proved more valuable than I'd anticipated. Beyond the expected evidence of financial impropriety and misuse of company resources, Keith's team discovered communications suggesting Andrew had been selectively disclosing information to certain clients about Finley Investments' internal positions, a potential securities violation that elevated the stakes considerably. This goes beyond expense account abuse, Keith explained during our debriefing session. If he was providing privileged information to select clients while representing the firm, it could constitute a serious breach of fiduciary duty, possibly even regulatory violations. I considered this new information carefully. Include it in the documentation, but segregate it from the personal misconduct evidence. I want to maintain clear separation between the different categories of impropriety. While Andrew was away, I also visited the lake property with Eleanor and the project development team. Standing on the shore where Robert Mitchell had taught his grandson to fish, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Not guilt, but a certain solemnity about the transformation I was initiating. We'll preserve the cabin's historical elements while integrating it into the wellness center, the lead architect assured me, pointing out features on the preliminary renderings. It will become the heart of the retreat, a symbol of heritage reimagined for healing. Perfect, I approved. And the timeline? Environmental assessment begins Monday, Eleanor confirmed. Surveying and preliminary site marking by Wednesday. We should have visible but non-invasive indicators of development activity within 10 days. I nodded, visualizing Andrew's reaction when he eventually discovered what was happening to his grandfather's property. Not yet knowing it now belonged to me, he would first have to confront the reality that his hasty sale had immediate consequences, that the boutique hospitality concept he'd vaguely imagined was becoming concrete reality under my direction. "Proceed as scheduled," I instructed, "and ensure all proper notices are filed with the county and visible on site." The weekend passed methodically as I balanced urgent professional projects with strategic personal planning. By Sunday evening, when Andrew returned from his retreat, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier of his professional misconduct, advanced Lakeside Vision's development timeline, and prepared for the next phase of my divorce strategy. Andrew appeared distracted and tense upon his return, barely acknowledging my presence as he immediately sequestered himself in his home office. Through the closed door, I could hear him engaging in a heated phone conversation, snippets of phrases, like unexpected regulatory review and disclosure requirements, suggesting his professional world was experiencing turbulence. When he finally emerged, his composed facade had slipped noticeably. "Rough weekend?" I inquired neutrally, looking up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing Meridian's quarterly projections. "Corporate politics," he dismissed vaguely. "Nothing worth discussing." I nodded, returning to my work without pressing further. His body language, the tight shoulders, clenched jaw, fidgeting hands, told me more than his words ever would. Something was unraveling in Andrew's carefully constructed professional image, creating an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. The following morning, I contacted Marcus Reynolds to discuss accelerating our timeline. "Andrew's professional situation appears to be deteriorating," I explained. "I'm not certain of the specifics, but there are indications of potential regulatory issues at Finley Investments." "That could work to our advantage," Marcus confirmed. "If he's facing professional scrutiny, he'll have less bandwidth to contest the divorce terms. However, there's also risk. If his financial situation collapses entirely, there will be fewer assets to negotiate with." "The lake property is secured," I reminded him, "and my primary financial accounts are protected. I'm less concerned about maximizing settlement than ensuring clean, expedient resolution." Marcus considered this perspective. "In that case, we could consider filing within the next 30 days, rather than waiting the full 3 months. The property transaction is legally solid and your documentation of the affair is comprehensive. Let's prepare everything for filing, but hold until we have better intelligence on the Finley situation," I decided. "I want to time this precisely." That intelligence arrived sooner than expected. 2 days later, the financial news reported that Finley Investments was undergoing an unscheduled compliance review by securities regulators. The firm's stock dropped 8% on the news, and anonymous sources cited concerns about information management protocols within certain divisions. Andrew came home that evening in a state I'd never witnessed before, his typical confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. He poured himself a double scotch and downed it before pouring another. "Difficult day?" I asked, maintaining my supportive wife persona despite knowing exactly what was causing his distress. "Regulatory bullshit," he muttered, loosening his tie with uncharacteristic roughness. "Some disgruntled client filed a complaint, and now the entire firm is under scrutiny." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds stressful. Will it affect your department directly?" Andrew's hesitation told me everything. "Potentially. They're reviewing all client communications for the past 18 months, including, undoubtedly, the selective disclosures Keith's team had discovered in Andrew's files." I felt a momentary flicker of concern, not for Andrew, but for the timing of my strategy. If his professional collapse accelerated too quickly, it might complicate the divorce proceedings. "I'm sure it will resolve positively," I offered, the platitude sounding hollow even to my ears. "Your records are meticulous." Another calculated statement, knowing full well his professional documentation was anything but meticulous. Andrew nodded distractedly, already lost in calculating potential scenarios and outcomes. The same strategic thinking he applied to investments, now desperately focused on professional survival. The following week brought rapid developments on multiple fronts. Finley Investments announced an internal leadership restructuring, with several executives taking voluntary leaves of absence, pending the regulatory review. Andrew's name wasn't on the initial list, but his increasing anxiety suggested he expected to be implicated soon. Meanwhile, Lakeside Vision's development activities at the lake property proceeded on schedule. Environmental assessments were completed, survey markers placed, and preliminary notices of commercial development posted at the property boundaries, all following proper protocols and creating public records of the planned wellness retreat. Keith's team continued monitoring Andrew's activities, documenting increasing communication between him and Olivia during business hours, and numerous urgent meetings with colleagues that didn't appear on official calendars. Most tellingly, Andrew began bringing home papers in unmarked folders, documents he reviewed late into the night and returned to his office each morning. Classic document sanitization behavior, Keith noted when I reported this development. He's likely reviewing and potentially removing problematic communications before they're discovered by compliance reviewers. This assessment matched my own interpretation, but it raised a strategic question. Should I use this information immediately or preserve it for the divorce proceedings? I consulted with both Marcus and Zoe, seeking the optimal approach. If you provide evidence of document tampering to Finley's compliance team now, it will accelerate Andrew's professional crisis, Marcus advised. That could be advantageous for the divorce timing, but it might also trigger desperate financial moves that could complicate asset division. Zoe offered a different perspective. Consider your ultimate objective. If clean separation with minimal conflict is the goal, then having Andrew professionally occupied but not completely destroyed serves your interests better than causing his immediate termination. I weighed these viewpoints carefully, ultimately deciding on a calibrated approach. I would compile the evidence of document tampering, but not immediately provide it to Finley Investments. Instead, it would serve as leverage if Andrew contested the divorce terms, a sword of Damocles hanging over his professional future that I could choose to drop at the optimal moment. This decision proved prescient when, 3 days later, Andrew came home with news that changed our timeline completely. I need to travel to London next week, he announced abruptly over dinner. Extended regulatory meetings with our international compliance team. I'll be gone at least 10 days, possibly longer. I registered both the information and what remained unspoken. This wasn't a routine business trip, but a crisis management exercise, potentially removing Andrew from immediate regulatory scrutiny while the firm addressed compliance issues. That's short notice, I observed. Will Olivia be coordinating your travel arrangements? The slight emphasis on her name was deliberate, the first hint that I might know more than I'd revealed. Andrew's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his expression flickering between surprise and calculation before settling into forced casualness. Probably. It's usually handled by the executive assistants. I nodded, returning to my meal. When do you leave? Monday morning, early flight. He studied me carefully, perhaps searching for signs of suspicion or knowledge. Finding none in my carefully neutral expression, he continued, "This is important for the firm's stability. A lot of jobs depend on getting this right, including his own, though he didn't say that explicitly." I recognized the statement for what it was, a preemptive justification for his extended absence, a narrative construction that positioned him as the responsible executive protecting his company, rather than a potential subject of investigation. As soon as Andrew went upstairs, I contacted my strategy team to implement the accelerated timeline. Marcus would prepare the divorce filing for submission on Tuesday, the day after Andrew departed for London. Keith would complete his final documentation package, and Diana would prepare a comprehensive financial analysis demonstrating how Andrew had diverted marital assets toward both his affair with Olivia and his personal investments. Most critically, I contacted Eleanor to advance Lakeside Vision's development activities. I want visible, unmistakable evidence of the property's new ownership and intended purpose in place by next weekend, I instructed. Nothing that violates any regulations, but clear indicators that development is proceeding. We can install the project announcement signage and begin the perimeter marking, Eleanor confirmed. All within proper guidelines, but definitely noticeable to anyone visiting the property. The weekend before Andrew's departure passed in a strange combination of tense silence and superficial normalcy. He spent hours in his home office, presumably preparing for his London meetings while actually sanitizing his professional communications. I focused on completing Meridian Healthcare's quarterly marketing strategy, a genuine professional task that provided perfect cover for my distracted demeanor. Sunday evening, as Andrew packed for his trip, I received confirmation that all elements of my strategy were in place. The divorce filing was prepared, the evidence packages organized, and Lakeside Vision's development markers scheduled for installation on Wednesday. The timing was orchestrated with the precision of a marketing campaign launch, each element carefully sequenced for maximum impact. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain, appropriate weather for the dissolution of a marriage built on mutual ambition that had devolved into unilateral betrayal. I maintained the supportive wife facade as Andrew prepared to leave, even preparing his favorite breakfast and ensuring his travel documents were organized. "Good luck with the compliance meetings," I offered as he loaded his luggage into his car. "I hope everything resolves positively." Andrew nodded, distracted by his phone, which had been buzzing incessantly with messages since dawn. "Thanks. I'll try to call when I can, but the schedule will be intense." "I understand," I replied, knowing those calls would never come. By the time he returned from London, our marriage would be officially in dissolution, his professional misconduct documented and ready for disclosure, and his grandfather's property visibly transformed into my newest business venture. As his car disappeared down our street, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The pain of his betrayal remained, a dull ache beneath my strategic focus. But it no longer controlled my actions or defined my future. I had transformed that pain into purpose, channeling it into a methodical reclamation of power that Andrew had never anticipated. I watched the rain intensify, washing away the last traces of his departure, then turned back to our house. My house now, in both practical and emotional terms. Tomorrow would bring the formal beginning of our marriage's end. But today, I had work to complete, both for Meridian Healthcare and for my own carefully constructed future. The following morning, I met Marcus at the courthouse to file the divorce petition. The document was comprehensive, but not vindictive, outlining Andrew's infidelity and financial misconduct with clinical precision rather than emotional language. "Once this is filed, it becomes public record," Marcus reminded me as we prepared to submit the paperwork. "Are you ready for the potential attention this might generate, especially given Andrew's position at Finley and your role at Meridian?" I nodded confidently. "My CEO has already been discreetly informed of the situation. As for public attention, it will be minimal compared to what Andrew faces when he returns from London." The filing process was surprisingly anticlimactic, just paperwork and signatures, the bureaucratic dissolution of what had once been a passionate commitment. No ceremony marked the end, just as no witnesses had been present at the beginning. When Andrew had proposed on a private sailing trip around Lake Meridian, as we left the courthouse, Marcus outlined next steps. "The petition will be formally served to Andrew's office, but given his travel status, we've arranged for electronic service as well. Email delivery to both his personal and professional accounts, ensuring he can't claim lack of notification." "And the timing of this delivery?" I inquired. "Scheduled for Thursday morning, Eastern Time, midday in London." That gives us 2 days to implement the remaining elements of your strategy before he's officially notified. I nodded approval of this timeline. Perfect. Lakeside Vision begins preliminary site work tomorrow. By the time Andrew receives the divorce petition, the property transformation will be visibly underway. The next phase proceeded with military precision. Wednesday morning, Lakeside Vision's development team arrived at the lake property to install project announcement signage, survey markers, and preliminary construction boundaries. By afternoon, large professional signs announced the forthcoming Lakeside Wellness Retreat, complete with architectural renderings showing how Robert's cabin would be preserved as the heart of a modern healthcare facility. Simultaneously, Keith delivered his final documentation package regarding Andrew's professional misconduct. A comprehensively organized dossier showing expense account abuse, misuse of company resources, and most damaging, evidence suggesting selective disclosure of privileged information to certain clients. This package wasn't delivered to Finley Investments yet, but remained as strategic leverage should Andrew contest the divorce terms. Diana Chen completed her forensic financial analysis, documenting how Andrew had systematically diverted joint assets toward both his affair with Olivia and his personal investments, without appropriate disclosure or consultation. This analysis would form the backbone of our position in settlement negotiations, demonstrating a pattern of financial infidelity that paralleled his personal betrayal. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. At precisely 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. in London, Andrew would receive electronic notification of the divorce filing, along with a summary of evidence regarding his infidelity and financial misconduct. I imagined him in some sterile conference room, surrounded by compliance officers and regulatory experts, when the notification arrived, his professional crisis suddenly compounded by personal collapse. I spent that morning at Meridian Healthcare, presenting the quarterly marketing strategy to our executive team with the same focused professionalism I'd maintained throughout this ordeal. No one observing me would have guessed that at that very moment, my husband was discovering that his carefully constructed life was unraveling on multiple fronts simultaneously. At 9:17 a.m., my phone began buzzing with incoming calls from Andrew. I silenced it without answering, focusing instead on fielding questions about Meridian's preventative care initiatives. By the time the meeting concluded at 10:30 a.m., I had 12 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 9 voicemails, a digital record of Andrew's progression from confusion to anger to desperate bargaining. I listened to the voicemails in my office, door closed to maintain privacy. Andrew's voice evolved from controlled questioning. "Rebecca, what is this? Call me immediately." To explosive rage. "You had no right to do this while I'm dealing with this professional situation." To pleading negotiation. "We need to talk about this. There are things you don't understand. Please call me." The text messages followed, a similar pattern, culminating in a final message that confirmed he'd made the connection I'd been anticipating. "Just got a call about activity at the lake property. What the hell is going on there? Are you somehow involved in this? Call me." I forwarded the messages to Marcus without responding to Andrew directly. Our strategy had been clear from the beginning. No direct communication once the divorce was filed. All interactions through legal representatives only. Emotional engagement would only provide Andrew with information or opportunity he might leverage. At 11:45 a.m., Marcus called to update me. "Andrew's attorney has made contact. Gerald Hoffman from Sterling and Hoffman. They're requesting an immediate stay on proceedings until Andrew returns from London." "Anticipated response," I noted. "What's your recommendation?" "We decline the stay but offer to conduct initial discussions via secure video conference if they prefer not to wait. This maintains our momentum while appearing reasonable to the court." "Proceed accordingly," I approved. "Any indication that Andrews made the connection regarding Lakeside Vision?" "Not explicitly in the legal communication," Marcus replied, "but Hoffman mentioned concerning activity regarding separate property assets that they want addressed. Immediately. I smiled slightly at the phrasing. Separate property assets referenced the inherited status of the lake property, but concerning activity suggested Andrew had indeed received reports about the development markers and signage. Maintain our position that the property transaction was completed legally with full disclosure and fair consideration, I instructed. If they press the issue, we can provide the complete transaction documentation. By late afternoon, the strategic landscape had evolved further. Finley Investments issued a press release announcing an expanded internal review of client communication protocols, with several executives, including Andrew, placed on administrative leave pending completion of the process. The firm's stock dropped another 3% on the news, and financial analysts began speculating about potential regulatory consequences. Simultaneously, Zoe forwarded information from her sources indicating that Eric's venture fund, where Andrew had invested the proceeds from the lake property sale, was experiencing liquidity issues, with redemption requests from early investors being delayed due to administrative processing constraints. All of Andrew's carefully constructed plans were collapsing simultaneously: his professional standing, his personal relationship, his financial investments, and his control of his grandfather's legacy. Each element had been orchestrated not through vindictive sabotage, but through strategic leverage of his own choices and vulnerabilities. That evening, as I reviewed the day's developments with my strategy team over a conference call, I felt no triumph or satisfaction, only a calm certainty that I had protected myself in precisely the way Andrew had failed to protect our marriage. This wasn't revenge, it was consequence. Andrew has requested a video meeting with both legal teams tomorrow morning, Marcus informed us. His tone suggests he's looking for resolution rather than confrontation at this point. His options are limited, Diana observed, with Finley placing him on administrative leave and the venture fund facing liquidity issues. His financial position is rapidly deteriorating. Settlement may be his most rational choice. And the lake property? Zoe questioned. Has he made the connection to Rebecca yet? Not explicitly, Eleanor replied. Our corporate structure provides appropriate distance. He knows Lakeside Vision purchased the property and is developing it, but there's no direct evidence connecting Rebecca to the ownership chain. I considered our position carefully before responding. Let's proceed with the video meeting. I'll participate but maintain focus on the divorce settlement rather than the property transaction. If he raises the issue directly, we acknowledge the connection only if legally necessary. As the call concluded, I received a notification that Andrew had sent an email to my personal account, breaking protocol by attempting direct communication. The subject line read simply, "I know what you did." I forwarded it to Marcus without opening it, maintaining the discipline that had characterized my approach from the beginning. Whatever accusations or revelations Andrew believed he had discovered would be addressed through proper legal channels, not emotional exchanges that might compromise my strategic position. Tomorrow would bring the first direct confrontation since I had discovered his betrayal, a carefully managed video meeting where Andrew would finally recognize the full consequences of underestimating both my intelligence and my resolve. The meeting would mark the beginning of resolution, the final phase of a strategy that had transformed me from betrayed wife to architect of my own reclaimed future. Friday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity unusual for Lakeside Springs in that season. The perfect weather seemed incongruous with the storm I was about to face, but perhaps fitting. My vision had never been clearer than it was now, with all pretense between Andrew and me finally stripped away. I dressed with particular care for the video conference, selecting a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without aggression. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, makeup subtle but flawless. Image management was second nature in my marketing career, and today's presentation of self was perhaps the most important I'd ever crafted. the visual embodiment of composed strength rather than wounded betrayal. Marcus had arranged for me to participate from a conference room at his firm, a neutral professional setting that would prevent Andrew from making any emotional appeals based on our shared domestic space. I arrived 30 minutes early to review our position and establish proper camera framing. Andrew and his counsel will be connecting from London at 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus confirmed as we prepared. Based on the preliminary communication from Hoffman, they're positioning this as an opportunity to correct misunderstandings rather than contest the filing. A predictable approach, I noted. Andrew's always framed his failures as misunderstandings rather than choices. Marcus nodded, arranging his documents with practiced efficiency. Our strategy remains unchanged. We acknowledge his position, but maintain focus on the evidence and necessary legal resolution. Emotional engagement serves his interests, not yours. At precisely 9 a.m., the video conference began. The screen split to show Andrew and his attorney, Gerald Hoffman, in what appeared to be a hotel suite in London. Andrew looked haggard, his usually impeccable appearance diminished by obvious lack of sleep and the strain of maintaining professional composure while his personal life imploded. Hoffman, by contrast, projected calculated calm, the expensive, suit and practiced neutral expression of a man accustomed to managing high-stakes negotiations. "Good morning," Marcus began with professional courtesy. "I believe we all understand the purpose of this meeting, to discuss the divorce petition filed by my client and establish parameters for proceeding in a manner that serves all parties' interests." Hoffman nodded with collegial deference. "Indeed. Though we must note our objection to the timing of this filing, Mr. Mitchell is currently engaged in critical regulatory matters requiring his full attention. We believe Ms. Mitchell's decision to initiate proceedings during this particularly sensitive professional period demonstrates concerning tactical motivation." I maintained my neutral expression, allowing Marcus to respond appropriately. My client's timing was based on her own considerations, including discovery of Mr. Mitchell's lengthy affair with his executive assistant and his systematic diversion of marital assets toward both that relationship and personal investments without appropriate disclosure or consultation. Andrew shifted in his seat, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "This is absurd. Rebecca, you know that." "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus interrupted firmly, "all communication should proceed through counsel. Direct appeals to my client are inappropriate in this context." Hoffman placed a restraining hand on Andrew's arm, a gesture I recognized from countless business negotiations. The attorney, recognizing his client was about to damage their position through emotional outburst. "We acknowledge there have been personal complications in the marriage," Hoffman continued smoothly. "However, my client contests both the characterization and extent of these issues. More pressing is our concern regarding certain business activities apparently initiated by Ms. Mitchell during Mr. Mitchell's absence." Here it was, the connection I'd been anticipating. Andrew had clearly discovered enough about Lakeside Vision to suspect my involvement, but lacked definitive proof of the ownership structure. "If you're referring to my client's professional activities at Meridian Healthcare, those are entirely separate from these proceedings," Marcus replied with practiced ambiguity. "I'm referring specifically to development activities at the lakefront property recently sold by my client," Hoffman clarified. "We have reason to believe Ms. Mitchell may have orchestrated this purchase through concealed business entities, constituting a form of fraudulent transaction if proven." Marcus maintained perfect composure. "The property transaction was conducted at fair market value between Mr. Mitchell and Lakeside Vision LLC, with all appropriate disclosures and documentation. If you're suggesting impropriety, we would need to see specific evidence rather than speculative accusations." Throughout this exchange, I maintained my neutral expression, even as Andrew's gaze fixed on me with growing intensity. His eyes reflected the dawning realization that his hasty property sale, motivated by eagerness to invest in Eric's venture fund and facilitate his new life with Olivia, had somehow played directly into my hands. "Rebecca," Andrew said, ignoring his attorney's visible frustration at this direct address, "did you orchestrate the purchase of my grandfather's property?" For the first time since the meeting began, I spoke directly, my voice calm and measured. "The property transaction was legitimate in every respect, Andrew. You received fair market value for an asset you voluntarily sold to pursue what you described as a superior investment opportunity. The documentation signed by you acknowledged complete disclosure and satisfaction with all terms." "That doesn't answer my question," Andrew pressed, his frustration mounting visibly. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus interjected firmly, "direct questioning of my client is inappropriate. If you have concerns about the property transaction, please provide specific legal objections through your counsel." Hoffman, recognizing the conversation was veering off course, attempted to redirect. "Perhaps we should focus on the immediate practical matters regarding the divorce proceedings. My client is currently unable to return to the United States for at least another week due to his professional obligations. We request a 30-day continuance to properly prepare our response to the petition." Marcus consulted briefly with me before responding. "We're willing to accommodate Mr. Mitchell's professional circumstances by extending the response deadline by 14 days, not 30. Additionally, we propose establishing an interim agreement regarding access to marital property and financial accounts during the pendency of proceedings." What followed was an hour of detailed negotiation regarding temporary arrangements, Andrew's access to our home, supervised retrieval of personal belongings only, use of joint financial accounts, frozen pending court determination, and communication protocols through counsel only. Throughout these discussions, Andrew's attention remained fixed on me, his expressions cycling between anger, confusion, and something approaching reluctant admiration. He had underestimated me, my strategic capacity, my emotional resilience, my ability to orchestrate consequences rather than simply react to betrayal. That recognition was now dawning. Too late to alter the outcome, but perhaps in time to adjust his approach. As the meeting concluded with tentative agreement on interim arrangements, Hoffman requested a few minutes of private consultation with his client. Marcus and I stepped away from the camera while maintaining the connection. "He's realized you're behind Lakeside Vision," Marcus observed quietly. "But he lacks definitive proof, and the transaction documentation is impeccable. His options for challenging it are limited, especially given his current professional vulnerability." I nodded in agreement. His primary concern now will be damage. Control, minimizing professional consequences while securing whatever financial position he can salvage. The property is secondary to survival at this point. When we returned to the conference, Andrew's demeanor had noticeably shifted, the initial aggressive indignation replaced by calculated pragmatism. This was the Andrew I recognized from business negotiations, assessing his position realistically and cutting losses where necessary. "We're prepared to discuss settlement parameters," Hoffman announced. "My client values efficiency and minimal public exposure in resolving these matters. We believe a negotiated resolution serves everyone's interests better than protracted litigation." Marcus maintained appropriate professional caution. "We're certainly open to settlement discussions, but with full financial disclosure and acknowledgment of the documented misconduct. My client has no interest in public exposure either, but she requires appropriate recognition of her contributions to marital assets and compensation for the disruption caused by Mr. Mitchell's actions." "And the Lake property development?" Hoffman inquired carefully. "What is your client's position regarding those activities?" "The property was legally sold by Mr. Mitchell to Lakeside Vision LLC," Marcus replied with precise wording. "That transaction is complete and separate from the divorce proceedings. My client has no legal position regarding the buyer's subsequent development activities. Andrew leaned forward, his frustration briefly overriding his attorney's strategy. This is ridiculous. Rebecca, we both know you're behind this. You've orchestrated this entire situation. The divorce filing while I'm dealing with regulatory issues, the property development starting the moment I'm out of the country. This isn't coincidence. I met his gaze directly, maintaining perfect composure. You're right about one thing, Andrew. None of this is coincidence. Every action has consequences, including canceling our anniversary dinner to be with your executive assistant, using company resources to facilitate your affair, and selling your grandfather's property to fund investments while building a life. That excluded me. You made choices. I simply ensured those choices had appropriate outcomes. The momentary silence that followed was perhaps the most honest communication we'd had in years. Andrew finally confronting the reality that his actions had set these consequences in motion, that his betrayal had been met not with emotional collapse but with strategic response. Hoffman quickly moved to regain control of the narrative. We proposed the following preliminary settlement framework: equal division of verified marital assets, mutual non-disclosure regarding personal conduct, and expedited timeline for resolution. In exchange, we request withdrawal of any potential communications regarding Mr. Mitchell's professional conduct to his employers or regulatory authorities. This last element confirmed my suspicion. Andrew feared the evidence of professional misconduct more than any financial settlement. His career was hanging by a thread, and exposure of his misuse of company resources could sever it completely. Marcus glanced at me for guidance before responding. We'll consider this framework as a starting point for negotiations, with certain modifications. My client has no interest in prolonging these proceedings, but she requires full financial accounting before agreeing to asset division parameters. As the meeting concluded with agreement to exchange formal settlement proposals within 48 hours, I maintained the same composed demeanor I'd presented throughout. Only when the connection ended did I allow myself a moment of quiet reflection, not celebration or vindication, but acknowledgment of successfully navigating the first direct confrontation. He's in a weaker position than even we anticipated, Marcus observed as we gathered our materials. The combination of professional crisis and discovery of your connection to the property has destabilized his approach. He's looking for the fastest exit with minimal additional damage, which aligns with our objectives, I noted. Clean resolution without prolonged conflict or emotional engagement. Marcus nodded approvingly. Exactly. Now we move to settlement negotiation from a position of substantial leverage. As I left the law offices and drove to Meridian Healthcare for an afternoon meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Blackwell. Development permits officially posted at Lake Property. Preliminary site work commencing Monday. Photographs documented and filed with county record. Another piece falling perfectly into place. Visible, official transformation of the property Andrew had hastily sold to fund his new beginning with Olivia, now becoming the cornerstone of my independent future instead. My afternoon meeting at Hebidyar. Meridian focused on the wellness initiative that would eventually connect to the lakeside retreat, a perfect integration of my professional strategy and personal reclamation. Dr. Winters was particularly enthusiastic about the potential partnership. The concept aligns perfectly with our preventative care vision, she noted as we reviewed preliminary proposals. Having a dedicated facility for stress recovery and wellness integration gives us a distinctive market position. I nodded in agreement, allowing myself to fully engage with this positive aspect of my future, rather than dwelling on the dissolution of my past. The property's natural setting provides ideal conditions for the mind-body connection we're emphasizing in the program. By the time I returned home that evening, the day's events had crystallized my perspective further. This wasn't just about responding to Andrew's betrayal. It was about reclaiming my future on my own terms. The lake property development wasn't merely symbolic justice, but a genuine business opportunity that aligned with my professional expertise and personal values. Saturday morning brought the formal settlement proposal from Andrew's attorney, terms that reflected his weakened position and desire for rapid resolution. He conceded primary ownership of our home, accepted a division of financial assets that favored me appropriately given his documented misconduct, and most tellingly, included no mention of the lake property transaction. This last omission confirmed that his legal team had reviewed the purchase documentation and recognized its unassailable legitimacy. Marcus called to discuss the proposal as I reviewed it. "This is substantially more favorable than typical first offers," he noted. Hoffman must have convinced him that protracted negotiation serves no one, especially given his professional situation. "I agree," I replied. "The terms are reasonable, though I'd like strengthened non-disclosure provisions regarding both the infidelity evidence and his professional conduct documentation." "Easily incorporated into our counteroffer," Marcus confirmed. "We can deliver that response by Monday morning." Later that day, Zoe arrived for our standing coffee meeting, now focused on settlement strategy rather than evidence gathering. Her professional assessment aligned with Marcus's. Andrew was seeking fastest possible resolution with minimal additional exposure. "He's fighting battles on multiple fronts," Zoe observed as we sat in my kitchen, reviewing the settlement documents. "Professional survival at Finley, potential regulatory consequences, the apparent collapse of Eric's venture fund, and now confirmation that you've outmaneuvered him on the lake property. His resources, financial, emotional, and strategic, are completely depleted." I nodded, sipping my coffee thoughtfully. "Which is precisely why we maintain pressure through measured response rather than vindictive escalation. The objective is clean resolution, not unnecessary destruction." "Always the strategist," Zoe noted with approving admiration, "even in the endgame." Sunday passed quietly as I finalized preparations for the coming week, reviewing Meridian's marketing initiatives, organizing documentation for the settlement counteroffer, and confirming Lakeside Vision's development timeline with Eleanor. The careful compartmentalization that had characterized my approach from the beginning continued, each aspect of my life receiving appropriate attention without emotional overflow from one domain to another. Monday morning brought several significant developments in rapid succession. First, Marcus delivered our settlement counteroffer to Hoffman, maintaining the general framework while strengthening the non-disclosure provisions and clarifying financial division details. Second, Finley Investments issued another press release announcing expansion of their internal review, with several executives including Andrew placed on extended administrative leave, pending completion. The firm's stock dropped another 5%, and financial analysts began questioning the company's internal controls more aggressively. Third, and most consequential for Andrew personally, the first public reports emerged regarding problems with Eric's venture fund. The Financial Times published an article citing liquidity challenges and withdrawal restrictions facing investors, with anonymous sources suggesting concerning irregularities in the fund's reporting practices. Keith forwarded this article to me with a brief note. "This explains A's increasingly desperate financial moves. The property sale proceeds are likely inaccessible now." This development dramatically altered Andrew's position. The capital he'd gained from selling his grandfather's property was potentially trapped in a failing investment vehicle, leaving him without the financial cushion he'd anticipated for his post-divorce life with Olivia. By Tuesday afternoon, Hoffman had responded to our counteroffer with minimal revisions, essentially accepting all substantive terms. This unusually rapid agreement confirmed our assessment of Andrew's weakened position and desire for immediate resolution. "We can have final documents prepared by Thursday," Marcus informed me. "Given the agreement on terms, the court will likely fast-track approval, potentially concluding everything within 3 weeks, rather than the typical months-long process." I authorized Marcus to proceed, maintaining the measured pace that had characterized my approach throughout. No triumphant acceleration, no vindictive demands, just steady progression toward the clean resolution I'd identified as my objective from the beginning. Wednesday brought the first direct communication I'd had from Olivia since this process began. An email that arrived in my personal account with the subject line, "Regarding the current situation." Unlike Andrew's impulsive attempts at direct contact, Olivia's message was carefully composed, almost formal in its construction. "Rebecca, I understand you have no obligation to communicate with me, but I feel compelled to clarify certain aspects of my relationship with Andrew. While I cannot defend my actions, there are contextual factors you may not be aware of regarding the timing and circumstances. I'm not seeking forgiveness or intervention in the legal proceedings, simply an opportunity to provide information that may be relevant to your understanding of events." I forwarded the email to Marcus without responding directly. His assessment matched my own. This was likely an attempt to position Olivia favorably in advance of potential professional consequences, as Finley Investments' investigation expanded, to include misuse of company resources to facilitate their relationship. "No response is the appropriate response," Marcus advised. "Any engagement creates opportunity for manipulation or complication." I agreed completely. Whatever contextual factors Olivia wanted to share were irrelevant to my path forward. The evidence of their relationship was documented beyond dispute, and my strategy had never been about emotional confrontation or assigning blame beyond what was legally necessary. Thursday morning brought news that Andrew was returning from London earlier than planned, that afternoon rather than the following week. This accelerated timeline suggested his professional situation had deteriorated further, possibly reaching the point where his physical presence in London was no longer required or desired by Finley's leadership. Marcus confirmed this assessment when he called to update me on settlement progress. My contacts at Finley indicate the regulatory review has expanded significantly. Several executives, including Andrew, have been moved from administrative leave to separation pending investigation status, essentially termination with minimal public disclosure. This development transformed Andrew's position completely. He was returning not as a financial executive managing a regulatory challenge, but as a former executive facing potential industry exclusion and SEC scrutiny, with his investment capital trapped in a collapsing venture fund. "How does this affect our settlement approach?" I asked, always focused on strategic implications rather than emotional satisfaction. "It strengthens our position further, but also introduces potential complications," Marcus explained. "If Andrew faces significant financial penalties from regulatory action, it could impact his ability to fulfill settlement obligations. We should consider accelerating the asset division timeline to secure your position before any potential freezes or forfeitures." I authorized this adjustment, maintaining my focus on practical outcomes rather than punitive measures. Andrew's professional collapse was the consequence of his own actions, not my objective. My goal remained consistent: secure separation with appropriate financial resolution and minimal ongoing entanglement. Friday morning, the final settlement documents were prepared for signature. Marcus arranged for this process to occur at his offices, with Andrew and his attorney scheduled to arrive at 2:00 p.m., just hours after Andrew's return flight from London. In preparation for this final in-person encounter, I reviewed my strategy one last time with Zoe over breakfast at Summit Coffee. "Maintain the same composed approach that served you throughout," she advised. "No triumphant declarations, no emotional engagement. This is simply the final business transaction concluding your relationship." I nodded in agreement. My objective has never changed: clean resolution that allows me to move forward on my own terms. "And the lake property?" Zoe inquired. "Will you acknowledge your connection to Lakeside Vision during this meeting?" I considered this question carefully. Only if directly questioned with specific evidence. The property transaction was entirely legitimate. Andrew's failure to conduct proper due diligence on the buyer was his choice, not my manipulation. Zoe smiled slightly. A choice made while he was distracted by Olivia and the promised returns of Eric's venture fund. Poetic justice in its purest form. At 1:45 p.m., I arrived at Marcus's offices for the settlement signing. I'd selected a navy suit, professional without being severe, confident without being triumphant. My objective remained consistent. Conclude this chapter with dignity rather than drama. Marcus greeted me with professional warmth, updating me on final preparations. Hoffman confirmed they're en route from the airport. Andrew's flight arrived on schedule, though apparently there was some complication regarding his status at Finley that required additional phone consultation before they departed. I nodded, unsurprised by this development. Andrew's professional unraveling continued to accelerate in parallel with our divorce proceedings, not by my design, but as the natural consequence of his own choices and vulnerabilities. At precisely 2:05 p.m., Andrew and Hoffman were shown into the conference room. The transformation in Andrew since our video meeting was stark. The confident financial executive completely erased, replaced by a man visibly exhausted by simultaneous personal and professional collapse. His typically impeccable appearance had given way to subtle dishevelment. The slightly rumpled suit, the loosened tie, the darkened circles beneath eyes that reflected both jet lag and profound uncertainty. Our eyes met briefly as he entered, his expression unreadable beyond general weariness. There was no anger now, no accusation. Perhaps he had finally moved beyond blaming me for the consequences of his own actions, or perhaps he simply lacked the energy for continued hostility. "Thank you for accommodating the adjusted timeline," Hoffman began with practiced courtesy. "My client appreciates the opportunity to conclude these matters efficiently." Marcus nodded professionally. "We've prepared the final documents as agreed. Everything is consistent with the terms established in our last exchange." What followed was surprisingly anticlimactic. Just signatures and initials on multiple pages, the formal dissolution of 12 years together, reduced to legal boilerplate and asset schedules. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional outbursts, just the mechanical completion of a process that had begun the moment Andrew had texted to cancel our anniversary dinner. Throughout this procedure, Andrew remained unnaturally silent, speaking only when directly addressed by his attorney. His gaze occasionally drifted to me, something unspoken in his expression. Not quite regret, not exactly respect, but perhaps recognition that I had managed this situation with a strategic precision he had never anticipated. As the final documents were notarized and copies distributed, Hoffman guided the conversation toward practical next steps: timeline for asset division, protocols for personal property retrieval, implementation of communication restrictions. It was only as the meeting concluded that Andrew finally addressed me directly. "The lake property," he said quietly as we all stood to leave. "Lakeside Vision. That was you, wasn't it?" The question hung in the air, neither accusatory nor angry, simply seeking confirmation of what he had already deduced. After a momentary pause, I met his gaze directly. "The property transaction was completely legitimate, Andrew. You received fair market value for an asset you chose to sell. The development plans were always there in the public records. If you'd bothered to research the buyer before signing." He nodded slowly, something like reluctant admiration briefly crossing his expression. "You outmaneuvered me completely. I never saw it coming." "You were distracted," I replied simply. "By Olivia? By Eric's investment promises? By the future you were planning that didn't include me? You made choices without considering all potential consequences." Andrew absorbed this assessment without protest, recognizing its fundamental truth. The wellness retreat concept, using grandfather's cabin as the centerpiece. That's actually something he might have appreciated, more than luxury condos anyway. This unexpected acknowledgement momentarily caught me off guard. A glimpse of the Andrew I had once known, capable of recognizing something beyond his immediate self-interest. "The property deserves to be preserved in a meaningful way," I replied, after a brief pause. "Its heritage respected while serving a new purpose." Andrew nodded again, then extended his hand in a formal gesture that acknowledged the conclusion of our relationship. "Goodbye, Rebecca." I accepted the handshake briefly. No warmth, but no lingering resentment either. "Goodbye, Andrew." As they departed, Marcus observed quietly, "That was surprisingly civilized for a high-conflict divorce conclusion." "The conflict ended when he recognized his position was untenable," I replied. "Andrew's always been a pragmatist when facing irreversible outcomes." Later that evening, as I sat on my patio reviewing the final settlement documentation, I felt no triumph or vindication, only a calm certainty that I had navigated this challenging chapter with strategic clarity and emotional discipline. The marriage was formally dissolved, my financial position secured, and my future direction established on my own terms. The lake property development was proceeding on schedule, with architectural plans that honored Robert Mitchell's legacy while creating something new and meaningful. Meridian Healthcare's wellness initiative was advancing toward potential partnership with the retreat. My professional standing remained untarnished by the personal upheaval I'd experienced. Most importantly, I had maintained agency throughout this process, transforming betrayal into strategic response rather than becoming a passive victim of Andrew's choices. The path forward was now entirely mine to define, unconstrained by the compromise and accommodation that had characterized our marriage. As twilight settled over Lakeside Springs, I allowed myself a single glass of champagne, not to celebrate victory over Andrew, but to acknowledge my own resilience and capability. This wasn't an ending, but a transition, from a relationship built on mutual ambition to a future defined by authentic purpose and self-determined direction. The text message that had initiated this transformation, "Something's come up at work. Can't make dinner tonight. Don't wait up. Sorry," now seemed almost trivial in retrospect. Andrew had believed he was simply canceling an anniversary dinner to be with Olivia. He hadn't recognized that he was setting in motion the complete dismantling of the life he had taken for granted and the emergence of a strength in me that he had never fully appreciated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, finalizing Lakeside Vision's development timeline, advancing Meridian's strategic initiatives, establishing my independent life beyond the constraints of a compromised marriage. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, I acknowledged the journey completed and the transformation achieved, not just of circumstance, but of self. 1 year later, I stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Lakeside Wellness retreat, watching the morning mist rise from the water. Robert Mitchell's cabin had been meticulously restored and incorporated as the heart of the facility, its weathered logs and stone fireplace now the centerpiece of the reception area where guests began their healing journeys. The grand opening was scheduled for tomorrow, a carefully orchestrated event bringing together healthcare executives, wellness industry leaders, and local officials to celebrate what many were already calling a pioneering model for integrative healthcare destinations. Dr. Winters would be announcing Meridian Healthcare's formal partnership with the retreat, a professional triumph that paralleled my personal transformation. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," Eleanor confirmed, joining me at the railing. Final inspections completed, staff fully trained, press materials distributed. "It's remarkable what you've accomplished in just 12 months. I nodded, allowing myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The timeline was aggressive, but necessary. Some transitions demand momentum. Eleanor smiled knowingly. She had witnessed my metamorphosis from betrayed wife to empowered entrepreneur, understanding that the retreat represented more than just a business venture. It was the physical manifestation of reclaimed purpose. "Have you heard anything about Andrew recently?" she asked carefully, respecting my general reluctance to discuss my former husband. Zoe mentioned he's relocated to Seattle, I replied with comfortable detachment. Apparently working for a smaller investment firm in a significantly reduced capacity. The regulatory restrictions following the Finley investigation limited his options considerably. What I didn't mention was the final outcome of Eric's venture fund. A complete collapse amid accusations of misrepresentation and fraud that had consumed most of Andrew's investment. The financial consequences of his hasty decision to sell his grandfather's property had proven even more devastating than I had anticipated, though I took no satisfaction in this outcome. It was simply the natural result of choices made without proper due diligence, the same pattern that had characterized his betrayal of our marriage. And Olivia? Eleanor inquired. Working for a tech startup in California, according to her LinkedIn profile. They didn't last beyond the professional fallout at Finley. This information had come from Diana, who maintained peripheral awareness of both their circumstances as part of her professional network monitoring. Their relationship had apparently collapsed under the weight of consequences. Andrew's professional disgrace, financial deterioration, and perhaps mutual recognition that what had begun as exciting forbidden connection couldn't survive the harsh reality of public scrutiny and diminished circumstances. Last I'd heard, Andrew had moved to Seattle alone, while Olivia had rebranded herself as a startup operations specialist 3,000 miles away. My phone chimed with a text from Dr. Winters. Board unanimously approved expanded partnership. Agreement. Announcement prepared for tomorrow's opening. Congratulations, Rebecca. I smiled, sharing the message with Eleanor. This represented the culmination of a strategy that had begun in the darkest moment of betrayal. The integration of personal reclamation with professional advancement, transformation of loss into opportunity. You've created something remarkable. Here, Eleanor observed, gesturing toward the retreat complex. Not just the facility itself, but what it represents. Most people would have channeled that betrayal into destruction, of themselves or others. You channeled it into creation instead. Her observation crystallized something I'd felt but never articulated. This past year hadn't been about punishing Andrew for his betrayal. It had been about honoring my own worth through strategic response rather than reactive emotion. The retreat wasn't a monument to revenge but to resilience, to the capacity for growth that emerges from necessary endings. That evening, I walked alone through the retreat grounds, appreciating the thoughtful integration of natural landscape with healing spaces. The wellness philosophy we'd developed emphasized connection to nature, to purpose, to authentic self. These weren't just marketing concepts, but principles I'd embodied throughout my own journey from betrayal to restoration. Near the lakeshore, a stone path led to a contemplation garden surrounding Robert Mitchell's original boathouse, now transformed into a meditation space. The structure had been carefully preserved, its weathered timbers reinforced but unaltered, the history respected while serving a new purpose. As I entered the space, soft ambient lighting illuminated the evening shadows, revealing hand-hewn beams and the faint carved initials RM that Robert had placed there decades ago. I traced them gently, appreciating the connection to heritage that remained despite the profound transformation of purpose. My phone vibrated with an incoming email, the final confirmation from Marcus that all legal proceedings related to the divorce were officially completed, including the last property transfer documentation and tax filings. The timing seemed fitting. This final administrative conclusion arriving on the eve of the retreat's opening. One chapter fully closed, another beginning with clarity and purpose. The following morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the grand opening celebration. I dressed with careful consideration, a tailored dress in deep teal that projected both professional authority and authentic warmth. Today wasn't just about marketing a new wellness concept. It was about embodying the transformation it represented. The event unfolded with the precision of careful planning. local officials cutting ceremonial ribbons, healthcare executives touring specialized treatment areas, wellness industry leaders experiencing program demonstrations. Dr. Winters delivered a compelling announcement about Meridian's partnership, positioning the retreat as the cornerstone of a new preventative care initiative that would distinguish our healthcare system nationally. Throughout the morning, I navigated conversations with practiced ease, discussing architectural preservation with historical society members, wellness programming with healthcare providers, economic impact with community leaders. Each interaction reflected a different facet of the vision I'd developed: comprehensive, thoughtful, authentic. During a momentary lull in the activities, Zoe appeared at my side, elegant in her professional attire, but with the slight smile that was reserved for our personal connection. "Congratulations," she said simply. "This is magnificent." "Thank you for everything," I replied, the words encompassing far more than just the retreat development. Without her guidance in those first dark days after discovering Andrew's betrayal, none of this transformation would have been possible. Zoe understood the deeper meaning. "You did the hard part," she noted, choosing strategic response over emotional reaction, creation over destruction. Most people never manage that transition. As the event concluded and guests departed, I found myself alone in Robert's cabin, now the reception heart of the retreat, but still containing elements of his original craftsmanship. The stone fireplace he had built by hand, the exposed beams he had selected from the property's own trees, the western-facing windows he had positioned to capture evening light. I ran my hand along the burnished wood of the mantel, appreciating the continuity of purpose despite dramatic transformation. Robert had built this space as a sanctuary from life's demands. It would continue serving that purpose for others, though in ways he couldn't have imagined. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reflections. Diana entered, digital tablet in hand, her professional demeanor temporarily set aside for genuine connection. "I thought you'd want to see this immediately," she said, extending the tablet. It just crossed the financial newswire. The headline read, "Former Finley executive faces additional SEC charges in ongoing investigation." The accompanying photograph showed Andrew entering a federal building, expression grim, posture defeated. The article detailed new allegations regarding his role in the firm's regulatory violations, extending beyond the original scope of the investigation. I scanned the content quickly, then handed the tablet back to Diana without comment. Andrew's continuing professional challenges were no longer connected to my life or future, neither a source of satisfaction nor concern, simply information about someone whose choices had once affected me but no longer held any power. Diana studied my reaction carefully. "You genuinely don't care, do you?" "It's not about caring or not caring," I clarified. "It's about proper perspective. Andrew's ongoing consequences are the natural result of his own decisions, not relevant to my path forward." Diana nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. That's the difference between revenge and strategic response. Revenge remains connected to the original injury. What you've done is create something entirely new, independent of the betrayal that catalyzed it. Her observation resonated with my own evolution. The retreat wasn't about Andrew at all. It had become something authentic and meaningful that stood entirely on its own merit, disconnected from the circumstances that had initiated its creation. As evening fell on the retreat's first official day, I stood again at the lakeshore, watching sunset colors reflect across water that had witnessed generations of transformations. Robert Mitchell had found peace here, teaching his grandson to appreciate natural beauty and simple connection. That grandson had eventually abandoned this legacy in pursuit of something he perceived as more valuable, only to lose everything in the process. Now the property had found new purpose, honoring heritage while serving healing, preserving connection to place while facilitating personal transformation. The symmetry felt appropriate, a fitting resolution to a journey that had begun with betrayal, but evolved into creation. My phone chimed with a message from Dr. Winters. First guests arriving tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your vision becomes reality. Extraordinary. Accomplishment, Rebecca. I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket as I took one final walk along the lakeshore before departing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, guests to welcome, programs to refine, outcomes to measure. The retreat would evolve from concept to living entity, its success determined by authentic impact rather than marketing promises. As for me, this milestone marked not an ending, but a continuation of professional growth, of personal authenticity, of living deliberately rather than reactively. The woman who had once sat in her car photographing her husband's betrayal had transformed not just her circumstances, but her fundamental approach to life's challenges. Andrew's text canceling our anniversary dinner. Something's come up at work. Can't make dinner tonight. Don't wait up. Sorry. Had been meant to dismiss me, to relegate me to the periphery of his new priorities. Instead, it had initiated a journey toward claiming center stage in my own life, toward building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. I turned toward my car, ready to return home and prepare for tomorrow's new beginning. The retreat stood illuminated against the gathering darkness, Robert's cabin at its heart, a beacon of transformation that had begun with an anniversary dinner never attended and culminated in a future I had designed entirely on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.